Snafud is a podcast that contains adult themes and language. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey guys, welcome to Snafud, where the situation's normal, all fucked up. This is the podcast where we bring you stories of true crime, true mystery, and truly fucked up shit that happens to us every day. With such a crazy world, it's easy to forget, so we're here to remind you. I'm Shannon.
And I'm Corey. Thanks for giving us a listen today, guys. So last week we dove into witches and witchcraft, and I had a real lot of fun with that because I got to visit the Trials of Salem, which is, my home area.
Yeah, we might have gone a little witch crazy after that. We definitely watched a ton of movies like The Craft, Practical Magic, just basically pretty much anything that had a witchy vibe to it.
And it's Halloween, so that's half the reason why we did this. But I even noticed that Shannon here is starting to wear a lot of black, too, after watching The Craft.
Okay. First of all, it's an understated color to wear. And second, yeah, it's funny. It's weird how a color can get you in the mood for the season, and I like it.
That's one of the things I realized when you move to Florida is that a lot of the fall colors seem to not happen because it's impossible to wear black down here because it's always so hot.
You tell that to all the skinny girls walking around.
You know what? So there's nothing really wrong with being happy. If you want to wear black, you can keep wearing black.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. I'm glad I have your permission.
When you walk around, you get to see everyone dressed for the fall. And it's kind of weird for me still. I've been down here in Florida for a number of years, and sometimes I miss the fall because it never feels quite like Halloween down here.
It can't. It's just too freaking hot. Honestly, there's nothing funnier than trying to watch Floridians try and decorate for the holiday, especially palm trees. Every year, every person that owns a palm tree tries to freaking decorate it. First of all, Christmas is right out. It does not work.
Yeah,
every
no,
12-year-old boy will explain that one to you instantly.
Yep.
But actually, one guy around the corner did a really good job. He took like 3 palm trees, these giant webs, and then he stuck a bunch of big giant spiders in it.
I think I saw that one. Today I actually was at the grocery store, and a bunch of people are walking around with gourds and pumpkins, and they just look super happy. But I'm like, oh.
I think it's in everybody. Everybody gets literally excited around now because it's not a holiday where anything's expected of you other than for you to enjoy yourself. Go dress up, have a good time. Every other holiday is about like buying things for other people or making these really big meals. And yeah, we might go all out for Halloween, but it's because we can, not because we have to. And it's just so much fun.
I think for me, it's just I'm used to going to pumpkin patches and picking up my own pumpkin that way, not going to the grocery store because the only place I can find pumpkins. And that's what really got to me.
I mean, I grew up all my life in the South, and I'm used to going to pumpkin patches or going to church yards and, like, doing a church pumpkin sale. Like, that's what we do. We love it as much down here as anybody else. We just don't get to run around in fall sweaters.
And then
like
you
everybody.
pick up the ugliest pumpkin, and you know what happens when you do that.
You get
David as pumpkin.
He's his own thing.
Like a skeleton.
But yeah, that leads us up to our newest Halloween episode, episode 7, where we're going to be talking about vampires, not David S. Pumpkin.
See, David S. Pumpkins could probably have like 2 or 3 episodes on this because he's just his own thing. But we figure to keep it into the traditional Halloween spirit, we'll go with everyone's favorite bloodsuckers. Vampires are a really interesting phenomena. They're so ingrained in our way of life and the way of thinking about Halloween anytime that it gets scary that there's just so many different types of vampires out there too.
Well, let's just say what it is. It's already in our current folklore. Like, we're not just talking about the past or, ancient times or people in the 18th century. We're talking about, what's spooky to us right now. Ghosts, vampires. We call it folklore because we know it's not real, and it's just something that we can tell scary stories about and creepy movies and give ourselves a little bump in the night but wouldn't it be weird if it did exist? That kind of thing. I think that's what we find interesting is what we don't know. Yeah,
like how a vampire would exist in the modern day.
I think that I actually have done a lot of thinking about that because I like to imagine weird shit. I think it would be awesome.
Oh, how would it be? How are you thinking it's going to be awesome?
What,
have a vampire wander around.
You look like it doesn't look like it would be a good time.
My golden standard for vampires is Salem's Lot. And I've shown you pictures of Barlow. He's blue and really kind of not a pretty person.
So evidently, I had to learn this. Barlow is a vampire from Salem's Lot, which is a Stephen King vampire novel, and he looks just like Nosferatu. It's got that big moon face, like he's a butterface, and then he's got like like big ass teeth that have been sharpened up. So butterface plus like rabbit buck teeth that have been sharpened. And that's supposed to be real scary, y'all.
No, he's got big bat ears. So I don't want them wandering around, but all right, thrill me with why it'd be fun to have vampires wandering around.
Okay. I think of them more like the Sookie Stackhouse series.
All right.
Which is what True Blood was based off of, which is like vampires were humans, so they would look normal like a freaking human. And I just think, wouldn't it be crazy to have like vampires suddenly pop out like they did in that book where they're just like, oops, we always survive, we always been here, hey. But then like the things we could do with them, like right now would be the perfect time for vampires to come out. You know why?
Why?
We have 24-hour everything and we want more of it.
See, I feel like if it was 10, 15 years ago when the emo scene was big and everyone's super pale and pasty, that'd be perfect time
How
for
do you
vampires.
know they didn't come out then? They just didn't have to say who they were.
That's true.
I mean, nowadays, if a vampire were to come out, think of this, okay? You throw a party.
Yep.
You throw a 1920s party. How much money would you be willing to throw down on a guy who was alive or kind of alive during the 1920s and could decorate your rager with all like authentic decorations and music and be like, bitch, no, it was like this.
And
he
the
pulls
cost
out,
is only your best friend's life. Yeah, that's going to go real well.
no, you're so negative. Okay, for my wedding, I'm having a vampire from 1940 do my hair, and I will throw as much money as possible on that. I'm going to get that wave curl at the front that I can't do. It's going to be amazing. But that's just the thing. We can argue back and forth over vampires because over time, they've been everything. They've been all sorts of creatures.
You look at Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and vampires change their features as they go along. You have David Boreanaz just standing there looking all David Boreanaz-like, and then he turns his back to you, or you turn your back to him, and he has that monster face.
Are you talking about Angel?
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, Buffy and Angel, yeah.
Yeah, obviously, you just had to say that.
Okay, fine.
He's not another person. That's his only persona. It's just weird. Like, vampires are okay, I guess you're right. They can pretty much be almost anything. Like, my idea of a vampire is a former human who might have some kind of powers, mostly just hypnosis. Maybe they can fly.
Turn to bats.
And maybe they'll be, like, super fast. That's pretty much all I expect out of a vampire.
Yeah. For me, they're sleeping all day in a coffin in a abandoned church somewhere and freaking out the local townspeople.
See, if they were to come out, though, they wouldn't have to do that. They would just get a windowless apartment.
Yeah, that would work. Yeah.
Easy peasy, right?
Live in the wine cellar.
So this time, I actually want to go first. I want to throw it up in the air, make it a little different than usual for our spooky Halloween story. So, do you mind?
No, please go ahead. What do you got for us today?
Okay. I got more of a history on vampires. And man, they were nothing like I thought they were supposed to be. So, let's do it.
All right, let's go.
So what I wanted to do was actually trace back to where vampires originated from.
All right.
And I wanted to see, like, vampires through history because we've heard of them, like, popping up. Like, it's not something we just magically made up in the last 100 years.
Yeah.
What I was surprised to find was that vampires have been around in the culture and beliefs and religions since, like, the earliest of mankind. So vampires are just creatures and monsters. They're seen as demons and just beings that remove the life force from another person or animal in order to feed on it and remain alive. And interestingly enough, the earliest records of vampires come from Mesopotamia. I mean,
really?
Yeah, from like the crescent of life. We've already been talking about them. So according to Montague Summers in his book, The Vampire's Kith and Kin, the earliest vampire known...
Mike Tyson? Now Kith?
Kith? No, like...
I was putting the two faces together.
Now Kith.
Now Kith.
So the earliest vampire known to be depicted is on a prehistoric bull where it's just a man having sex with a vampire whose head has been severed from the body. Like, it's the weirdest freaking thing.
Some people have weird fetishes, I guess.
So freaking weird. But we've already found it on a prehistoric bull.
Is it a man or is it like an incubus?
It's a man having sex with a female vampire whose head has been removed.
Oh, that's great.
So, the Sumerians are the first civilization to show evidence of a vampire in myth and writing, and they had multiple demon-like creatures that resembled vampires in their mythology.
Yeah.
So you have the Ekemu, which are people who died violent or disappointing deaths. And to them, a disappointing death would be like dying before you ever found love. It's something that would be very upsetting to you because you didn't fulfill your life goals or something like that. That or not being buried properly, which is a common belief all around the world.
Yeah, that one's a universal.
So these creatures were believed to be demonic in nature. They were shambling around in like rotting bodies, or they could be like a phantom cloud that you couldn't see, like wind. It was really weird. And they would roam the earth in search of victims, and they like to attack helpless individuals and suck away their life force in order to feed themselves. And they're often like referred more as psychic vampires.
Okay, I've heard of that term before, but
yeah, but that's one of the first creatures like in Sumerian like belief to kind of show like sucking away life. So that's what is really considered a vampire in the past, would be pulling away life, pulling away blood, pulling away essence from somebody until they died. So after the Ekemu, you have the Uruku. I mean, I can't speak Sumerian.
You always find the best stories have the best names for you to pronounce.
I mean, I thought about letting you pronounce all these, but I thought you'd just quit.
I would. I would just say, hey, there's a word I can't pronounce, I'm not going to try.
And that would be dumb, so we're not doing that. But you have the Uruku, and you find them in a cuneiform inscription, which is like one of the first ways of writing. And it literally just says, quote, vampire which attacks man. That's what an Uruku is a vampire that attacks man.
Alright, so a vampire.
They like to haunt deserted places such as graveyards and other abandoned areas like sewers and dilapidated buildings. And it said if you look them in the eye, they can hurt you. So kind of like the original vampire powers. Like you look them in the eye, they can hurt you. They like to stay in graveyards. They like to stay in dark places most people aren't in. Like, we wrote this a million times. Well, yeah, we've been writing it for thousands of years. And then they also have the Lamashtu, and she is a Mesopotamian demon, the most terrible of female demons, and the daughter of the sky god Anu. So she likes to kill children. She drinks the blood of men and then eats their flesh. Understandable.
Alright, you get a meal after your drink.
She's known to disturb sleep, and she brings nightmares. She kills forests, like trees and nature, and she'll poison rivers and streams, and she bounds muscles of men so they can't move. Like, she's got a lot of really fun things she can do.
Yeah.
And she also likes to make pregnant women miscarry, and in general, she causes disease and sickness.
Seems weird that she drinks the blood of children, but will make women miscarry. I wouldn't want to be fucking my food source.
When you see a symbol of her, it's a lion or a bird-headed woman who is kneeling on top of a donkey, and she holds a double-headed serpent in each hand. She also has a dog suckling her right breast and a pig or another dog on her left. So basically, the bitch is busy. Okay?
Apparently.
She does a lot of things. If you go forward in time to like the Babylonian era, that's when you actually come across Lilith. And that might be a name that some people actually recognize because she's actually a figure in Jewish and Christian religion, although we've cut her out of things like the King James Version. Like, if you go back to the beginning of the Bible, you're not going to find her. So she originally comes up in the Babylonian culture, and she's just viewed as a demon that closely resembles the goddess Hecate, kind of the goddess of the dead.
Yeah, from Greek mythology.
Mm-hmm. But in ancient Hebrew culture, she also appears, and in this form, she comes as Adam's first wife. Imagine a lot of people haven't heard that one before.
I've read my Bible, and I never knew that one, but...
So, what they say is that, Adam is made from the dirt, that God creates him from dust to dust. And their version is that they also created Lilith, the first woman, right beside Adam of the same earth. However, in the Talmudic legend, she refused to obey Adam. She was like, fuck off, I can do my own thing, we're equal.
The original feminist.
So that wasn't cool, and she was cast aside to wander the earth as a demon. She's supposed to be able to hunt in the form of an owl, and she will attack newborn children and pregnant women so she can suck the blood and life from them. And she also has the power to induce erotic dreams in men. And by the time the Christian church basically took over her narrative, like, she becomes the main demon who is in charge of the succubi-incubi army.
I was going to say, she sounds like the original succubus.
And she is. So. Basically, the Christian church was like, ooh, a headstrong woman? She's bad, y'all.
Can't
She's
have
real
that.
bad. So they got rid of her and eventually just cut her out entirely, right? And then in 1500 BC, BC, we've been growing, like getting up from there.
It's a while, yeah.
We actually find vampires all the way in India. So there's a version of them called Rakshasas, and they're in the Indian Vedas. So they show up in Hindu mythology in a few different ways, but generally they're considered demons. And they originate from the feet of Brahma, which is a creator god. And that's kind of an insult because the bottom of the feet is like the dirtiest part of the human body. Like, it's the lowest part. So anything that were to come out of feet should, is like bad. You come out of the head, you're good. You come out of the feet, you're bad.
Right.
There's another saying that they're descendants of Kashyapa, and that's just another creator figure, and that would place the Rakshasas as a type of Asura, and that's a group of deities that usually are in opposition with the Devas, so the other gods. So sort of like a Titans against the Olympians kind of fighting. Yeah. So like you got the original, and they're on this side, and you got these guys, and they're on that
which
side.
Which side is which?
Rakshasas are the bad side. They're like the Titans.
All right.
And so the way they're described is that they're the earliest inhabitants to walk India. So kind of like how we have in Christianity where we believe like demons and angels and all that kind of walk the earth and they were half beings before people walked everywhere. Then this is their way of saying, look, the Rakshasas were in India long before people, and they were there when people were, and they're described as enjoying to tear people to shreds.
Oh, great.
To shreds, you say. They are very lustful, and they can only roam at night, and they're especially active during the full moon. Get the vampire vibe now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So some of them actually shapeshift into something with fangs, but it's never really like described what that is. And then they eat people alive whenever they're shapeshifted. And then other times they shapeshift into an owl, which you've heard before. And another fun trick they do is they possess corpses and then they make them feed on people.
Oh, that's great. Zombies now, too.
Yeah, so they're
wonderful.
They're vampire demons who make zombies. It's awesome. And they have their own pet vampires, actually. And they're called something I can barely pronounce, which is Yatudana. And they're just scavenger vampires, like little beggars who eat whatever scraps are left behind from the original vampire. Like, I think it's hilarious that they already have, like, a stepson. Like, it's awesome.
That's great, yeah.
And from there, we can actually go into Greek mythology. And you have Lamia. So, unsurprisingly, her story goes about the same way every fucking Greek mythology story goes. You ready?
Had sex or something?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So, Zeus is sleeping with this chick that's not his wife, Hera.
Imagine that.
Yeah. And then Hera finds out, what? And she's mad, obviously. And what does she do? She blames the person most to blame, the human.
Of course. Yeah.
I mean, Zeus does this all the time, but clearly not his fault. So she decides to actually get revenge, and she makes Lamia go insane. And in doing this, she causes her to eat all of her own children.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah. Once Lamia realizes what she's done, it actually drives her more insane, and she becomes like a monster made from her own grief, and she just starts attacking small children everywhere. And she is considered a night-roaming demon whose bottom half is turned into a serpent from her madness.
So, Capricorn.
And then the Romans changed her into something called Styx, and it's just a nocturnal bird that feeds upon the blood and flesh of people.
I thought Styx was a river and a band.
It's a lot of things.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Can't remember where it was, but I know Styx was a river too.
I sure know it's a band. To follow up with the Greeks, we have the Egyptians.
All right.
They have what they like to call the original vampire goddess.
Oh, who's this?
Okay, it is the goddess Sekhmet.
I know the name.
Mm-hmm, she's a huge figure, actually.
Yeah.
So Sekhmet is a warrior goddess who's the daughter of Ra, and Ra is the big head honcho, right? At the end of Ra's rule on Earth, he sends his daughter to destroy all the humans that had conspired against him. So he's like a bitter-ass old man, and now he just wants all his enemies dead.
He's Bender the Robot.
So he sends his daughter down, and she does her job, but her bloodlust is not satiated when she finishes killing all of his enemies or the people who conspired against him. And so she with her bloodlust, is driven to continue killing, and she can't stop. And she, according to the myths, she almost destroyed the human race because of this.
Shoulda, woulda, coulda.
Yeah, Ra realized he had, he needed to stop his daughter. He kind of let loose like this untamable, destructive force.
Oopsie.
Oops. Okay, we gotta fix this. This actually starts to turn into my all-time favorite myth story.
All right.
How do you think he stops her?
I have no idea.
Okay. He decides that he is going to give her beer.
Okay.
And he's going to spike that beer with some red, ochre so that it looks like blood. So she thinks she's drinking blood. So he just, leaves this beer where she can see it, and it looks like blood. And she's like, oh, that seems like a great idea. So she drinks it until she becomes incredibly drunk. And then she just finally abandons her killing spree, and she goes back to her dad and is like, yeah, I've realized drinking is more awesome than killing everybody.
Well... Whoever said drinking doesn't save lives.
Right? So he starts referring to her as the one who comes in peace. She actually gets her own holiday, and on that holiday they had a festival of intoxication.
Sounds appropriate.
But then she also becomes the protector of the dead and the ruler of the underworld. So kind of where you see she's bloodlust, she drinks blood, or she thought she was, and now she's in charge of the dead. She actually controls her own demons, and she sicks them on people who are guilty of doing bad things, and those demons bring disease, chaos, and pestilence.
Great.
So that's your first vampire goddess.
Yeah, that's terrific.
Not to be left out, the Celts in Scotland also have their own vampire.
Doesn't surprise me.
She is called something I will not be able to pronounce right, and it's Beoban Sith.
Okay, we'll just call her B.
Yeah. So the bee is a creature that can make itself appear to be a beautiful young woman, and she wears long green dresses, and that they're so long they hide her feet because evidently she can't change them, and they look like deer hooves.
Yeah, it's a cloven hoof.
She drinks the blood of her victims, and then she vanishes when the sun rises. So she shows up in a lot of different myth stories, just stories you would probably tell around a campfire. But basically, they usually revolve around the same theme. And that theme is that she shows up to hunters in the deep woods in the middle of the night whenever they happen to mention how lonely they are. They will dance or sing or party with the guy, and then they'll drink all their blood and disappear in the morning, and whoever finds them will just find them dead.
That's great.
They actually have a little bit of a fairy element to them on their own, which is they have a hard time dealing with people who use iron.
Yeah.
So you could get on a horse with feet that have the horseshoes on them, and evidently the vampire won't, or the bee won't be able to catch you. So, they're not Stephanie isn't the first one to figure out how to mix those two. And then, not to be left out either, is Asia. And they're creepy as hell.
Of course, there's Asia. Everything out of there is creepy.
So you have the Malaysian linguister, which is another female vampire. And see, that's another thing that we seem to be differing from. As you get into current vampires, it's a lot of males. It's always about Dracula. Dracula is the big head honcho. When you start looking into history, it's always big bad women who are just bloodthirsty. So you have the linguister, which is just a female vampire, which is the ghost of a woman who died either while pregnant or in childbirth. She will take the form of one of two things, okay? She'll either be a beautiful woman with long black hair that comes down to her ankles, or she just shows up as a floating head of a woman whose entrails and spinal column hang down from the neck hole.
Yeah, I'll take that first one.
She also gets to wear a green robe. That's real nice.
But she has no shoulders.
But she either has really long nails, or sometimes her hands extend all the way down to her feet.
Yeah,
her hand, the Slender Man lengthening.
Not dealing with that shit.
So she's also associated with nighthawks or owls, and supposedly these creatures sleep in a parasitic fern called the sacket, and current woodworkers that harvest that wood from the ringas tree in Malaysia feel that after they do this, they then have to go under an exorcism to keep from being haunted by the creature, because they destroyed her sleeping spot. Her favorite thing to prey on is humans, but she prefers the blood of newborn baby boys.
Of course, they're more delicious.
Clearly.
It's like veal.
That baby fat. It was just squish. And so there's a couple ways you can prevent a woman who died like this from becoming one of them. Would you like to hear how?
Probably cut off her head.
That's a simple one. No, those float, remember? Those float.
Make her eat placenta.
Ew. So you can prevent her from turning into one of these vampires by placing glass beads in the mouth, a hen's egg under the armpits, and needles in the palms of the hands.
You have to do all three?
You gotta do all three.
Yep, nope.
Okay.
She's becoming whatever that thing is. I'll kill her when she's back.
That's too much. Can I just burn you?
I'm just gonna wait and then just burn the body.
All right, so there's a purpose for each one of those things that they do. So the beads in the mouth will keep the creature from being able to shriek and scream like a banshee. The eggs are under the armpits are to keep her from waving her arms, and the pins are to keep her from opening and closing her hands while flying, so she can't get away.
So she's flapping.
Yeah, that's how they fly.
I'm not terrified of this one anymore.
I mean, you say that until I show you a picture of a doll that they made to represent.
No. Anytime there's dolls or children involved, I don't want to deal with it.
All right, so there were reported sightings of Linguister as recently as 2013 in Kelantan, Malaysia.
Yeah, it sounds like the Mothman prophecies.
No, police literally had to come out because several different sightings of some banshee creatures screaming and flying around at night, was keeping the villagers up. So the police suggested that everyone remain calm and that they should pray together to repel the banshee flying and cackling at night.
Yeah, I'll do it. That and a shotgun.
Well, it didn't. The only thing that actually fixed it was rumors. The rumors stopped after a local shaman claimed that he caught 4 of these things, and then sightings of them stopped popping up. And that kind of leads me off with something that I thought I could not leave off the list, and that is the Chupacabra. Chupacabra.
Yeah, it's
the chupa-chup.
That's like a Latin American thing, dog thing.
Well, I remember it being huge when we were growing up, and I was like, oh, this really old myth.
Dog shape.
Okay, it literally translates into goat sucker.
Yeah.
And it is a creature in folklore that attacks and drinks the blood of livestock. And it's supposed to be a really heavy creature that's about the size of a small bear. And then there's a row of spines that come from the neck all the way to the base of its tail. Do you know how old this fucking myth is?
I'm gonna go back to probably pre-Columbus times.
The first reported sightings was in Puerto Rico in 1995.
That's it?
Yeah, that's it. But since then, it's actually been claimed to be seen all throughout the Americas, and places such as Russia and the Philippines have reported their own chupacabras.
Oh, great. They're swimming now. Swimming.
Those damn immigrants taking our creatures' jobs.
We have our own folklore. Leave yours over there.
We have our own. But, so vampires, as we are more familiar with them today, they stem a lot from those folklore that we associated more with Transylvania or Eastern Europe. So we don't really think of vampires as demons or, scary succubi. We treat them as what we see is they're vampires, the dead coming back to suck on the living, right?
Yeah, of course.
In 1047, they first appear in the word Uper for the first time, and a document referred to, they're talking about a Russian prince as a Uper Lichy, or a wicked vampire.
All right.
And that's when it first really came visible in Europe.
All right.
Was all the way back in 1047. In 1196, a man named William of Newburgh wrote a book called The Chronicles, and it's actually, there's just him and one other guy who wrote a very similar book, and it's the best chronicles we have of early English history. And he even mentions, and he mentioned the children of Wolf's Pit, the green children.
Oh, yeah.
We heard that and we'll talk about them one day, but if you want, you can go listen to other podcasts, and they talk about these green children popping up, and he's not the only one that talks about it, but also in the same chronicles, he talks about several different stories about vampire-type revenants or spirits in England. In 1431, you have Vlad Tepes was born, and that's just Vlad Dracula. And he's also known as Vlad the Impaler because he's a piece of poo. In Romania, he is touted as a hero who defeated the Ottoman Turks. Vlad was just a prince of Wallachia. He was a prince. And he grew up with his brother for many years as a hostage of the Turks since he was 12 years old. So basically, his father was in war with the Ottomans, and they took his 2 younger sons prisoner in order to force him to behave correctly and not overstep his bounds, or they would murder his sons.
Oh, that's super.
And they were treated like royal prisoners, but they were still like kept in a dungeon. They were educated. He even like did military movements with them, but it wasn't a good life, and he very, very much hated them for it.
Yeah.
And so in 1448, he took power over his kingdom again with the approval of the Ottomans, but literally 2 months later, he was overthrown and he had to flee to Moldavia. He came back in 1456 with the backing of the Hungarians, and he ruled until about 1462. That time that he was ruling, he built Castle Dracula. He massacred thousands of his own subjects in order to get the rebellion in his country back in order. And he was a huge fan of torture, including staking people or placing them on giant poles. And he actually had a specialty in being able to do that and not kill you right away.
Oh, yeah, he's one of those terrifying types. Great.
The trick is
I don't
to
care.
oil the pole. Anyways, he's crap. He's a crap human being.
Yeah.
And that's why he gets assassinated in 1476. And then rumors started growing around him about his reputation, and then also the reputation of how he died. And they say that his headless body is supposed to be buried in Snagov, and that's near Bucharest. But the rumor is also that the grave is just empty. So you're like, okay, what part of that makes him a vampire?
Well, if it's empty, then he's wandering around.
Yeah, well,
Wanting to suck your blood, or whatever the fucking accent is.
you have to do it. Suck your blah.
Yeah, I'm not
And-
gonna try it again.
But basically, it has nothing to do with vampires. Vlad the Impaler didn't probably believe in vampires, didn't give a shit about vampires. He cared about Ottomans, he cared about respect, he cared about showing people that if they didn't do exactly what he wanted, he was going to murder them brutally. He was a crap person. And, he did get his country under control, his area that he was controlling, and he brought them into an era of prosperity, and that's why the Hungarians just freaking love him so much. But let's face facts, he was an awful person.
Yeah.
The only reason there's connections between him and anything having to do with vampires is that Vlad the Impaler just so happened to live right around the same time that the printing press became a thing. And people went crazy with it. For the first time, they can mass produce some papers and printings and pictures. And so Vlad the Impaler's stories were like the dirty magazines, with all the juicy crap gossip that you could buy. You just go buy a sheet that talked all about the crap things that Vlad was doing, and then at the bottom you would see a picture of him eating around bodies. It was
just terrible.
It was interesting for them. So he stayed. That's the only reason we know who he is. I don't think otherwise we'd have ever cared. But he was in the media, and people were interested. And that's when Bram Stoker, he discovered a lot of this. He saw this, and it gave him inspiration for when he wrote Dracula, where he took the name. And that's just his inspiration. That's why we all know this man. But by 1484, the Maleficarum, the book we mentioned last episode.
Yeah, the Witch's Hammer.
Yes, it is a witch hunter guide to how to hunt down and kill witches. And it also has a little side chapter that's also vampires. And this is how you hunt them and this is how you destroy them. But it's not a big deal. Witches are awful. And they go right back to that. So it's just interesting that back in 1484, this was already. So think about it.
Well,
the witch.
They had the Slayer, who's just always summoned every generation.
She was, and she was taking care of it. It wasn't as big of a deal.
Hunt the witches, we got a Slayer on the loose.
But, that's what I'm saying. We hit this big thing with witches being the big bad enemy. And vampires existed already, but it was more of a side thought. It wasn't something scaring people as much as the witch hunts and my neighbor is cursing me and magic is happening. Those were people you could see and blame. Vampires were something that was unseen and more of a demon, and that would be really calling on God to stop that shit.
Yeah.
So in 1645, a cleric of the Greek church named Leo Alatius wrote a paper that explained what vampires were. He called it vrikolikos, Greek, whatever.
So, cough drops?
Yes. And so 1645, you have a person of the church literally writing up a paper about vampires and what is it and what to do about it.
Well, that's always smart.
One of the most famous cases of a vampire occurred in 1727.
Huh.
It was in the Serbian village, Viduegna, and it was Arnold Paoli, and he was a soldier for the Austrian army. But he had finally just come home from his tour with the army, and he was returning home around spring.
Yep.
On his return, Arnold claimed that while he was with the army in Greece, he was attacked by a vampire. And he went so far as to claim that, yeah, he killed the vampire, but, it totally bit him before he killed it.
Yeah, so now he's got the vampire infection, right?
I just can picture this guy coming home from the army and just have done, shit work the whole time. He dug latrines and shit. He doesn't have a good story. So he's at the bar I got to see Greece, but I was attacked by a vampire. That was his bar story.
I killed it, but it bit me.
Bit me right before I could. I'm so cool, though.
Yeah, I don't like when people include in their own stories that they fail a little bit.
No, that makes it more believable.
It's a little too much Tina Belcher for me.
Well, now that he was home, he got a job as a farmhand, and unfortunately, he suffered a trauma fall from a hay wagon and hit his head, and he survived for a couple days, but eventually it was that injury that killed him. Probably cracked his skull, internal bleeding.
Yeah, brain bleed.
And he just died. But unfortunately, he'd been making all those stories up about being around a vampire and all this nonsense. So after he was buried, just a couple days later, there starts to being all these rumors around town that people are seeing him pop up places. He gets so bad that about 40 days after he was buried, the town-made officers go out and dig him up to see if he's a vampire or not. And so they did. And when they unburied the corpse, it appeared to be extremely fresh. The body was supposedly moved over to one side, like it had been sleeping on his side.
That's weird.
And then they said there was blood coming out of his mouth.
And when was it buried?
This would be back in 1727.
Yeah, well, do we have a month?
Yeah, 40 days.
What month on the calendar?
Spring. He was
okay.
Back in spring. But basically all this is it's what happens to bodies when they decay and you don't have much stuff around them. They bloat. They move a little bit, they can turn over a bit, and in all honesty, they leak. So what you think is blood is just some gross fluid coming out of the mouth.
Yeah,
it's not nice.
The human body's disgusting.
Well, with all this proof that he looked so fresh and had blood coming out of his mouth, they decided that he was obviously a vampire. He had to be dealt with, and so they staked his body, and reportedly when the body was staked, the corpse screamed and it gushed out a huge amount of blood.
I feel like that's, again, just a human body being disgusting.
Yeah, you just stabbed this bloated body.
Yeah.
And then all this shit just came flying out, and that's just gases relieving the body. It's not a scream, it's just a giant body fart.
Yeah.
But it made them feel so much better. So then they chopped off his head, good measure.
Yeah, that's smart.
And then they cremated the whole body anyways.
Yeah, I figure fire is probably the number one way of getting rid of almost anything that bumps in the night.
Fire, fire, fire. It's really just Slavic stories like that, especially originating from the 1730s, that shows a lot of history that includes vampires. It's a real fear for people, and it shows up in their folklore because it's not just a story, it's a warning.
Yeah.
So folklore from that region quickly ended up including witches and vampires, with vampires growing really big into folklore past the 1730s. And frankly, they had already had the witch hunts like we talked about. So back when the witch hunts were a big thing and vampires weren't, well, we're past that now. We've done all this hunting.
We're moving on to something else now.
Yeah, we've already killed enough innocents this way. We're a little embarrassed, but now we got a new fear. And it's this. So
I was gonna say, because that's obviously after the Salem trials, which is kind of the end of witch hunting in like all the world, I thought.
Well, witch hunting, which you were wrong because it's still happening today.
Well, you know what
from
I mean.
our last story.
Yeah, but the majority of it in like Western and white people culture.
Okay. But, well, the thing is that the witch hunts were something about anything could go wrong and you could blame someone you could physically see. It was a good way to get revenge.
Yeah.
And then pretend you were being a good person. With vampirism, we're talking about people who are dying and getting the life force sucked out of them, and you just can't explain why. You know, you see it, you know it's coming, but in the past, they didn't have anything like germ theory. We couldn't tell you, oh, he's sick with such and such, and we have a way to fix this disease.
Yeah, because isn't, like, with a lot of the vampires, like you're saying with germ theory, a lot of the people being sucked from their life is tuberculosis.
Yeah, well, and that's exactly it. A big reason for the growth of vampire lore arose because large number of people were dying and people around them didn't have an explanation for how they got the disease, what the disease was doing to them, or even when they would die from that disease. It's the biggest killer going on, and at the time it's called consumption. And so the disease rose in number from the people being affected started in the early 1600s. Like, this has been around for eons. Like, we have bodies of mummies from Egypt who show signs of tuberculosis.
Yeah.
But when it really started blowing up is when we all started living a lot closer to each other and started recording this. So the 1600s all the way to its peak into the 1800s. And just like we talked in our first episode with Carl Tanzler, we still saw it being one of the number one killers in the 1930s of people in Key West.
Yeah.
You know, in 1815, 1 in 4 people died in England from consumption. And then by 1918, 1 in 6 people in France were dying from consumption.
We can basically turn this podcast into, here's how consumption fucked up the rest of the world.
Today, we talk about England and consumption. It just never stops. Like, people today still have tuberculosis.
Yeah.
At least we finally have a way to deal with it. But back then, if you were dying from consumption, it could take anywhere from days to years.
Yeah.
It just basically caused the person to cough roughly, so they would produce blood-tinted sputum, which is just, you know, mucus and spit, but it's all red because you have like lesions in your throat and in your lungs, and they're rough, and you're doing it all the time, so you're bleeding. They would have fevers, they'd get night sweats, and then they would have severe weight loss despite the desire to be alive and want to eat and try and move around. The fevers and the weight loss caused the skin to turn like a really sickly pale, and it would like pull the skin back so you would look all skeletal and your eyes would sink down, but that you'd have this bright red flash all across your cheeks and you would be burning hot and you'd have those fever eyes. You were scary looking and
Yeah.
you didn't feel good. And then you would obviously die, and by the time anybody saw any of those symptoms, you were a goner. You're supposed to be dead. Just get away from them. It literally just felt like the life was being leached from their bodies. But what consumption really was, like we said, was tuberculosis, which is just an infectious disease that spreads through the air when people with active TB in their lungs either cough, spit, speak, or sneeze.
Great.
Yeah. So people at the highest risk are those who work or live with the person with the active TB. So when your family had a habit of falling to consumption, yeah, no shit, y'all just kept living around with each other until everybody happened to catch it. And so it takes a year for somebody to die. By the time you caught it, and now it takes you a year and a half to die, you're infecting somebody else in the house who just managed to not get it from the first time. It's insane. But they didn't know that. I mean, they didn't even know until 1689 when they started doing like weird autopsies that there were even nodules that would relate from like the disease in the lungs. Like, at least by then they were starting to study the body and the human form and muscles and all that, and they saw, look, yeah, we knew they were coughing and we knew they died, and then we see these bumps in here. That's all they got. You know, they can't say it comes from any particular disease or any way that people are living, and it wouldn't even be identified as one specific disease until 1820. And it wouldn't be named tuberculosis until 1839. And then the bacterium that actually causes the disease wouldn't even be identified until 1882 by Robert Koch. So when we think that people are stupid because they're dying from consumption for 300 years, it's because they literally had no fucking idea what germs were or what diseases were, or like there would be a separation, or it could be this one thing. There was no like way to heal anybody.
Yeah.
Initially, if you started to show maybe a few symptoms, they would tell you to go get that good air out in the West. Go move somewhere dry. You got a couple more years that way. Really, if you showed symptoms, most doctors just told your family, like, just prepare because it's over.
Yeah.
And they'd provide you with some kind of way to feel better if they could, if you were wealthy enough, and that was it. But with consumption and TB running wild like that, and it's funny, doesn't it seem like it used to be America would catch up like 10 years later from England because the only way things passed over was the ocean?
Yeah.
So there was definitely the scare in Europe over vampires, but guess what?
We got a scare in New England, too.
Yeah, America had its own vampire crisis. So we can't ever be left out. We got to do it.
Nope, and we're going to do it bigger and better than the other guys.
Crazier and wilder, and we're going to make sure you hold our beer because we didn't think we were going to die. So, that being said, I'm going to let Corey tell you guys all about the vampire crisis of New England.
So now that we got the background of vampires from the dawn of humankind until the modern day, let's dive over into New England because we have to have all the craziness in that little area of this nation. From witches to vampires to other topics that we'll hold for some future stories. In the height of the vampire crisis is the Ray family of Jewett City, Connecticut. And they garnered a lot of attention as being one of the premier families for vampirism.
In America.
In America, yeah. So, the Ray family of Jewett City has had multiple deaths over 9 years from consumption, the number one bad guy on this podcast. The first was the 24-year-old Lemuel, and he died in 1845. About 4 years later, Henry Ray, the father of the family, passed away from consumption. And another 2 years later, 26-year-old Elisha, which is a boy's name, even if it doesn't look like it reads like that,
it's old-timey,
also dies from consumption. So that's 3 over the course of those 9 years. It was in 1854 that the eldest son, also named Henry, so we'll call him Little Henry, we'll call Papa Henry the father, began to show symptoms of consumption. And he was obviously wasting away, so the remaining family and friends of the Ray family dove into a panic. They came to a conclusion that their dead relatives were feeding off of the family after rising from the grave.
Science and medicine, yes!
So let's just throw all reason out the window at this point. Obviously because the 3 prior to Little Henry dying all had the same symptoms, that someone's rising from the grave and obviously causing these symptoms to the whole family.
Yeah, I mean, what else could it be?
I have no idea. No idea. On June 8th in 1854, the family and friends of the Ray family went to the cemetery and dug up the bodies of the brothers Lemuel and Elisha.
Because, obviously.
Yeah, and then they just burned them, because that's what you do with dead bodies and vampires. You just burn them on the spot.
I'm surprised that we had so many burials when there was so much, plague-like.
I don't think they realized how it actually traveled, so, the body's dead, it can't really spread anymore.
I would just want to get rid of the body entirely.
Yeah, but, people are weird and they like to respect bodies, I guess.
How silly.
So, it had become the family's belief that if any of the remains in the grave had remained undecomposed, either wholly or in part, so slow decomp from being frozen in the ground for 9 months out of the year, then the surviving members of the family must continue to furnish substance on which the dead bodies could feed.
Wait, so you're saying that there was literally something still left in a grave after 9 freaking years?
I guess according to the records, or they just didn't want to take a chance, but the family was convinced. I mean, with Elijah being dead only 3,
obviously,
3 hard...
brother.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's just a risk they didn't want to take.
I don't know, a body in Florida, a body in, the subtropics, it definitely decays within 2 weeks.
Yeah, well, up north, not really.
Why?
Because it's cold and it's a frozen wasteland.
So, when you dig a hole, it's like popping a body in a freezer.
I mean, after a while, yeah, the ground is cold, especially at depth, because the sun's not as hot up that way, and even especially back in the 1850s, you're having very few days a year. Even nowadays, you have very few days where you're having over 90-degree temperatures. So it's just not incubating that much.
Jesus, why do people live there?
I don't know.
I
lived there because I was born there, but that's why I'm now in Florida. So what's interesting is that Lemuel had been dead for 9, Elijah had been dead for 3 years. on either side of Papa Ray. And they didn't dig up the father, and I don't know what superstition would keep the townsfolk from digging up all three of the bodies and burning them, and why only the brothers.
That's weird. I mean, he died right in the middle.
Yeah, it is really odd. But who knows, back then, primitive New Englanders.
Okay.
Only a few miles away, in the Walton family cemetery in Griswold, Connecticut, which is not the same as the Griswold family from National Lampoon, archaeologists have discovered evidence of a disturbed grave. Griswold was settled just after 1812, in parts by immigrants from western Rhode Island, who were, according to local lore, uneducated and vicious. So we got some
vicious?
ancient rednecks around there right now.
I would not want to move anywhere where they were like, those people are vicious.
That's probably why they got kicked out of Rhode Island.
You think they ate people? Like, what the hell?
I don't know. But if you're getting
Sounds like West Virginia.
If you're getting kicked out of Rhode Island, you've done something wrong. In November of 1990, some boys were playing in a nearby sand and gravel business because that's what you do up there because you have nothing else to do because it's boring. Some eroded dirt had, moved away and let human remains come through. One of the boys' mothers didn't believe his claim, and in order to prove it, he went back to the pit he and his buddy were playing in and came back with a skull.
Because, bitch, I'm gonna show you.
Any other bone doesn't really say, hey, I found a human body than a skull. What was eventually uncovered...
Go big or go home, Corey.
Yeah.
Go big or go home.
I mean, that's what this kid's thinking. What's eventually uncovered was 29 sets of human remains belonging to a family burial plot. All of the bodies were laid to rest and showed no interesting signs of uniqueness, except for one. In a coffin marked with tacks that read JB55, this is from the late 1840s that archaeologists are supposing, the lower legs are in perfect anatomical position, but beyond that, the body was completely rearranged. JB had his ribs rearranged and his femurs were pulled from his legs, crossed over his chest, and the skull was placed on top in a skull and crossbone.
A Jolly Roger!
Yeah, aside from in the middle of Connecticut, so...
What the hell?
Yeah, it's a literal skull and crossbones, and the only reason I can think of is because if you take the legs and the head off of the body, then maybe the vampire can't reassemble himself when it's time to go hunting.
He'd be all a jumble.
Yeah, he'd be all sort of screwed up. When archaeologists took JB in to study, they discovered that he was just an atypical farmer. His bones showed evidence of a hard life, including healed fractures and signs of inflammation, some sort of periostitis, so just inflammation of a membrane that's around the bones.
That sounds fun.
Shin splints, essentially, that were so bad, they left marks.
Oh, shit. I don't want those.
No.
That's a hard life.
Yeah, he was a farmer up there, and it's hard. More importantly, what they discovered were rib lesions. And there are multiple diagnoses for what could cause rib lesions. It could be typhoid, syphilis, but most likely
He's been running around, he's been all dirty.
It's most likely tuberculosis because, let's get real here. Symptoms of a chronic pulmonary infection severe enough to induce rib lesions would be coughing, spitting up mucus, and aches and pains in the chest.
So, literally you were so sick and did something so much, it left marks on your bones.
I mean, when you get, pneumonia or something like that, you feel your cord tightening so much, it's going to be like that, just worse.
Gross.
None of the other bodies in the cemetery showed signs of tuberculosis, though. However, in 1801, the town of Griswold indicated that during the previous 25 years, that consumption had proven to be mortal to a number. So it was a big concern, and a big way to kill a lot of people in Griswold was getting consumption.
Long before he died.
Yep. That being said, with consumption ravaging the area, when JB died, the locals wouldn't be surprised by the symptoms, but they would be terrified. They know what's going on, that this is not a good sign for any of this to happen.
Somebody's coming up next.
Yep. So all they knew was that an unseen cause of death was afoot. Superstition melding with a lack of answers to medical problems is exactly what caused this. By the time the townspeople had unburied JB, they found no soft tissue to destroy. So in answer to how to destroy a corpse that barely existed, they just rearranged their bones and created a skull and crossbones with his head and his femurs. JB is the only intact archaeological proof we have of these vampire hunts, where, alright, so we're either going to burn the bodies, or if there's no meat on the bodies, we're gonna fuck with the bones. Because we have no other answer, but it's better than doing nothing. We took the time to dig them up.
We dug them up and there wasn't much. Hey, here we go.
And so this brings us to the final story for our vampire episode. And this one is the story of Mercy Brown, the Rhode Island vampire, and America's last vampire.
Lord have mercy.
If any of you guys know anything about, vampire lore, you may have heard this story, so let's hope that we're bringing in some new aspects of it for you. Having lived in Rhode Island, I visited the grave a few times.
Been there?
Yeah, my brother and I have gone there a few times when we lived up in Rhode Island.
That's so cool.
The grave is actually in a small little Methodist, I think it's a Methodist cemetery, and it's anchored into the ground so no one can steal the gravestone or topple it over.
Because people are assholes.
Yeah, of course they are. So we're in Exeter, Rhode Island. And yeah, this is exactly the kind of town that Stephen King would write about when he's writing any of his stories, like Salem's Lot or It or any of his New England towns. Exeter would fit right in with that kind of story. It's an old farming town where it's kind of very creepy and
I bet there's like a
unsettled.
wonky guy, like wonky-eyed old man who's like, "Don't go up there," and you're
I
like,
mean, that's
"Go
why.
where?" And he's like, "There," and you're like, "The Chowder House?" And why? And he just like walks backwards into mist that showed up. Like...
Well, you do have those, like, when you watch older movies where you have those old gas stations where you drive in and it dings and the guy comes out and it's got the old style pump without the screens on it. And it's just got those numbers that scroll around.
Uh-huh.
We've got those up there still.
Yeah, we do too,
And
but people
Exeter-
don't come out and pump your gas.
No, they don't come out and pump your gas either, but someone will look in from outside the store, and that's when they'll come in and see what you're up to, because they're bored because you're going to Exeter and there's nothing there. So they're like, "Oh, where are you going to, you city slicker?" Because
I heard they're vicious up there.
we're coming out of Providence, and for them, this is a city. Grand reminder for everybody, this is a super tiny state. We have a county just south of where we're living that's bigger than the state of Rhode Island.
Oh.
Anyway, let's get back onto the story. So Exeter is just a town with a bunch of poor people farming to make their daily food and selling what they can off it. And they're using shitty soil, so they're not getting much done. Rhode Island itself is a very kind of rocky area, and Exeter's not prime farmland. According to the Exeter Historical Association president, Sheila Reynold Boothroyd, yep, not making that name up,
She's so fancy.
an apt description would be rocks, rocks, and more rocks. So
I don't ever want to live somewhere that someone's like, well, if I would have to describe it, shit, and more shit.
well, if you head a little bit more north of Exeter or a little bit east, you're gonna have a lot of like glacial till, so you're gonna have this really nice sediment and this nice soil.
What did any of that just mean? It's good for farming.
You have everywhere else in the state, aside from the islands that are actively there or the marsh to the south, is better for farming than Exeter. Exeter is really just the worst place to be farming in Rhode Island. Somewhere between 1820 at the height and the late 19th century, large sections of the town had been abandoned. Many farms had just been burned down by the U.S. government. Between that and the Civil War, the remaining men, were finding their futures in opening the Western Front. And, they're catching tuberculosis out in Exeter. And as a result, it made Exeter become a little ghost town in Rhode Island. And now, like we said, in 1882, tuberculosis was identified for what it was, but in the outer reaches of rural areas, this information isn't going as fast and as trusted as it is when you go a little bit east towards Providence or even east and north to Boston. In the 1890s, we still have proof of one physician blaming tuberculosis on drunkenness and want among the poor.
Oh, you're sick? You're poor and drunk.
You're poor
You
and
dumb bitch.
drunk and you want stuff that you can't have. Cures at the time were drinking brown sugar water and taking horseback rides because medicine.
Yeah, right. Leeches and lots of horseback jogging. Got it.
And, the best solution that people had was to go west, get some of that unused air out there.
Yeah, where people weren't, nobody breathed that shit in before.
Yeah, no one's out there aside from natives.
Gives you some of that good.
So we've got Mercy Brown, who on some reports went by her middle name of Lena. She was born on August 2nd in 1872 to George and Mary Elizabeth Brown.
Jesus, are we still talking about vampires in 1872?
Yeah, we're going to be talking about them for a little bit longer. In December of 1883, her mother, Mary Elizabeth, had passed away at 37 from consumption, leaving her husband, one son, and 6 daughters. So it's a big old family because you need to make sure you have kids that work at farm, and some of them might not make it. The next year, Lena's 20-year-old dressmaker of a sister, Mary Olive, also died from consumption. Her obituary mentioned that in her last few hours was filled with great suffering.
Ugh,
so that's the last thing you want to read in a freaking obituary, but it's what we've got. The entire town attended her funeral and sang hymns that she had selected. Mary Olive had joined the town church about a year prior to her death.
Bet she kind of knew and, sought out religion.
She's coming to God real quick.
Which is fine. It's okay to come to religion when you're facing a crisis. But, that seems obviously why everybody came out, right?
Yeah. A few years later, you've got Edwin Brown, who's the only son of the family and the eldest son. He started to show symptoms of consumption, and he was a big guy. He was a store clerk. He worked as shipping a lot of stuff around. He decided to leave for Colorado Springs to hope that unused air could save him. It seemed to work for a short amount of time, but he later returned to Exeter practically a decade later and was considered to be in a dying condition. By the time he arrived, his little sister Lena was already on her deathbed. This is Mercy Brown. When Mercy Brown was 19, she had what people had termed galloping consumption. She may have been asymptomatic for years, but once she showed symptoms of the disease, her health went really quick. So it was probably laying dormant, and then all of a sudden it just hit her and was going to drop her like a
She's
bag
not
of
one of those people
rocks.
dying for years. Like,
No, she's going down fast. So the doctor who attended to her told her father that medical aid was useless, and she died on January 17th, 1892. Her obituary and funeral were much smaller affairs. Her obituary read that Miss Lena Brown, who has been suffering from consumption, died on Sunday morning. Very short and to the point.
Wow, they gave a shit.
It seemed like the community was more concerned with the newly returned Edwin and his current failing health. You get the son of a family. He's got 5 other sisters. They're not too worried. One newspaper even wrote that if the good wishes and prayers of his many friends could be realized, friend Eddie would speedily be restored to perfect health.
God, what? You couldn't even write an obituary for the poor girl, and you can just, suck up to him that hard?
Soon, neighbors had started coming to the Brown family farm, not necessarily for Mercy's funeral, but to ask George Brown to consider that his son was dying because of an unseen force preying upon the family. Another situation, just like we saw in Jewett, where the whole family is getting the same disease, and something mystical must be happening.
Something must be sucking the life out of you.
Something must be killing you all. And they suggested that it was one of the 3 deceased females, wife or his daughters, that were feasting upon his son's tissue and blood, because that's the only answer we've ever had for consumption. A remedy was to find the offending corpse and destroy it, and only then would Edwin recover. They needed to exhume the bodies so that they could check for fresh blood in their hearts.
Yeah, because, science.
Yeah, exactly. First of all, George did not want to give permission for this. These were his loved ones, one of which he had just lost.
And it's his freaking wife.
It's his family. He doesn't want to do this. However, the community kept coming to him and basically saying that his son was dying, and they had the surefire cure for it, and got to dig up them bodies and burn them.
Yeah, and if you don't do this, it's your fault then if your son dies.
Yeah,
they're
basically
blaming him.
And so that put George into a corner, and eventually he gave his permission, though, he wasn't going to show up for this exhumation. He wasn't going to show up.
I don't blame him.
So on March 17th, 1892, a group of men came to the cemetery to dig up the 3 bodies while the family doctor was in attendance. Mary Elizabeth and Mary Olive had been dead for nearly a decade by this point. Their bodies were a little more than bones, so you've got very small bits of body.
Yeah, it's been 10 years or more.
However, Mercy Brown had been dead for less than 3 months and buried in the wintertime.
Oh, so
her body is going to be almost in pristine condition because it's like keeping them in a shitty freezer. They can't get the...
You can't quite keep it frozen enough that it's going to really stay good, but, it's good enough for now.
It's not going to decompose as quickly as these other ones. And it's 3 months in the winter. All the bugs die, so there's nothing there to eat it. And any other kind of decomp isn't going to happen until she's in the ground and there's ambient temperature that's not frozen. So she's pretty well preserved. The party then removed her heart and her liver, cut open the heart, and found clotted old blood because...
Yeah.
You don't have morticians that are going to be draining all the blood and replacing it with other fluids. The doctor made it a point to show everyone that Mercy Brown's lungs showed diffuse tuberculosis germs, which probably just made him feel super proud in a look at what I knew sort of way.
I totally told you this shit was bad.
Look at guys. And he's pointing at it and jumping up and down with joy, and no one cares.
You're like, no, dude, she's a vampire, and he's like, but I know something.
They're all focused on the fact that the body's not decomposing. And he's here like, oh, look, I found germs. So the heart and liver were removed and placed on a nearby rock where they would be burned. And then in, great crowd knowledge, they fed the ash of this in a drink to Eddie so he wouldn't die.
Here's your dead sister's burned liver and heart.
Spoiler alert, not even 2 months later, Eddie's dead on May 2nd.
What? I thought they had a surefire
He's 24, and that surefire cure was just absolute garbage. So this brings us to the end of the Mercy Brown story where, they're digging her up. Obviously, it's been frozen, so the body's not decomposing.
What year is this?
1892 is when she died, so it's less than 2 months. It's less than 6 months later that Eddie dies as well. And, so they dig up the body, desecrate it, and then rebury it. And now, like I said, you can go to the cemetery in Exeter. It's behind a little church off of a no-name road. If you don't know what you're looking for, you're going to pass by this building. Mm-hmm. Especially, we did it in the fall, once you did it in the summertime. There's no one's there. You might catch one other person there that's kind of doing the rounds because it's a very old cemetery, and in New England we love that sort of shit. But Mercy's gravestone isn't far from the building, and it's the only one that's braced with metal bars on the gravestone and then jammed into the ground so it can't be taken away.
Wow. Can I just ask, can we just start taking care of our graveyards? I mean, she's been desecrated enough alone with what these people did to her, yet alone some dumbass teenager coming out and thinking he's cool by, messing up a gravestone. Can we just be nice and, actually take care of things?
Well, and that's what they do, kind of take the time to check it out. And, nowadays you'll go and on the top of the stone, on the bottom of the stone, you'll see seashells or coins or little tokens kind of left as people visit Mercy Brown's grave. And most people realize that it was kind of a shitty story for her. And they leave little trinkets. And that makes me feel a little bit better about our species sometimes.
Aww. Well then, cheers to you, Mercy Lena Brown. You
Yep.
are a hero to me.
And so, guys, that's our vampire story for this week.
Yet again, America comes out punching, saying we're never going to be left behind from anything.
Yep, we are not letting you guys all win.
We do it too.
So I want to let you guys know that obviously we're on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, and almost everything you can listen to podcasts on nowadays. If you're looking for us on your favorite podcast listening
Application
thing, send us an email at snafudpodcast@gmail.com with which one you're listening on to and you can't find us, and we'll do our best to get ourselves on there.
Also, we'd really appreciate any kind of comments that you can leave, 5-star reviews. It really matters, and we appreciate it, and I read everything that you guys put out there. Feel free to contact us, send us an email, but the reviews, they're going to help us out a lot to get our podcast out there in front of other people, too. So don't feel afraid to share us. We appreciate it, and we can't wait to hear from you.
Yeah, so, hunt us down on iTunes, hunt us down on Instagram, hunt us down on Spotify, and we're always there. I want to send out another thank you to Hanu Dixit, which we are using as our intro music right at the beginning of the podcast. So want to thank him. You can find him as you can find him on YouTube at youtube.com/Hanu Dixit, HANUDIXIT. And yeah, we hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. So we'll see you guys next week.
Until then, happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween, everybody.